Hey everybody, welcome once again to Strictly Speaking here on True Blue. I'm Bob Frantz. Today we're going to do something that's rather timely. Now it might not be depending on what time and when you watch this recording, but we are just a few days away from Easter Sunday. And for Christians, and even for non-Christians, just people with a curiosity around the globe, you are probably familiar with the Shroud of Turin. You are familiar with the story, you are familiar with the believers, you're probably familiar with what the skeptics have said, but have you heard the story told by one of the foremost experts on the Shroud in the United States and maybe the world? Because that's what we have for you. We're going to have David Onysko in our studio. David is he is more than just a curious researcher on the Shroud of Turin. He has spent the better part of the last 40 years, maybe plus, researching the Shroud of Turin. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree from Cleveland State University, Masters of Education in 1991. After 2 decades of teaching, he has returned, or rather has turned his full-time attention to Sindonology, which is the study of the Shroud. David's interest led him to many scientific theological conferences in places from St. Louis to Rome to Dallas to New York. Over the years, he's spoken to thousands of people about the Shroud of Turin, including international audiences. In 1998, he and a worldwide press corps viewed the Shroud, the actual Shroud, not the images, but the actual Shroud during a private 45-minute showing. In August of 2000, David and his family traveled to Turin, Italy to see the image during the Shroud's Jubilee Exposition. He's been presenting the continuing story of the Shroud of Turin since the late 1980s. He lives in the greater Cleveland area, and today we have him right here in the True Blue studios. We go deep inside the Shroud of Turin next. All right, so let's welcome researcher and Shroud of Turin expert David Onysko to our studios here in your hometown and mine of Cleveland, Ohio. David, it's so good to have you.
Thank you, Bob. Good to be here.
So this is so fascinating. Obviously, this is at the time of our taping, it's Holy Week.
Yes.
We are, just a few days away from Easter and the holiest period on the entire Christian calendar. But before we talk about the Shroud, and before we talk about and by the way, everybody I have ever talked to about the Shroud instantaneously either says they believe it or it's a hoax.
Yes.
They believe it or it's fake. You, because I watch a lot of your presentations,
Sure.
have pretty much said the time for the is it real or not is over. This is not even a question anymore, and I'll let you
Correct.
explain why.
Correct.
But we'll get into the actual Shroud and the legitimacy of it and your research in a moment. But first, a lot of people are probably saying, why did you give up your professional career to pursue this full time? What did you walk away from?
Yeah. Well, when I first learned about the Shroud was in 1980. In 1978, STURP, Shroud of Turin Research Project, examined the cloth for the first and only scientific testing that was ever been done, 1978. 2 years later, they published their results in National Geographic, published in their magazine, June of 1980. Now, it was an interesting year in 1980, Bob. My mother passed. I was kind of in a spiritual fog. She was young, kind of questioning God a little bit. And then this magazine came out, same year. And it really rekindled what I had already believed growing up, that Jesus is who he said he was. But here was forensic evidence.
You were raised a Christian?
I was raised a Christian, yes.
Catholic?
Catholic, yes.
Okay.
And I went to Catholic grade school. And here was this magazine showing me what I believed by faith. Forensically, it was showing me that this man had evidence on him which corresponds to the gospel. So I was really, at that time, in kind of a spiritual wandering around. And here I found something in this magazine which kind of rekindled my faith. And is it a coincidence, Bob? My mother died in 1980. The magazine came out in 80, June of 80, and my mother's name was June. Wow. So I think that was, Dave, you're on the right path.
What did the magazine say or ask that grabbed you so much?
It just said the mystery of the Shroud of Turin, and I went to it, and there I saw the images. And it talked about the forensics of the science. There was faith there, but it was the science that got to me, the blood, the pollen, all the science is what corroborated what I thought.
And what were you doing in 1980?
I was teaching.
So you were teaching.
I was
what
teaching.
Did you teach?
I taught health and phys ed.
Okay.
I was a health and phys ed teacher. Cleveland Public Schools, private Christian charter schools. And then, you know, I was pursuing this thing on the side. I'd go to scientific theological conferences, trying to find out more, rubbing elbows with the tops in the world of shroud research, you know, theologians and scientists and historians, picking their brain, getting to know, you know, they're mentoring me, taking me under their wing, knowing what I needed to know. Because when I saw that article in 1980, Bob, I said to myself, I got to tell people about this. I got to tell them about it. I didn't know anything about the pollen in the head and the dirt on the feet and from Jerusalem. I mean,
But when you think that National Geographic's already doing that for you, they're telling that's going to reach a lot of people. People are going to know.
That's right, and it did. That article brought the shroud to really the world for the first time, and
It's so captivating because wasn't like one of the subheadings or subtitles, is this the face of Jesus?
Well, that's
when you hear that phrase,
Yeah.
I mean that's going to grab you, even if you're not a Christian, even if you just don't believe in this Jesus character, but is this what he looks like? It's going to make you look, right?
That's right. That's right. So many magazines, after the testing of 1978, really got turned on because here the world was looking at this thing from, you know, examining it scientifically for the first time ever. And so since then, of course, the carbon dating came out and poo-pooed that, and it's not real. And we can get into that in a little bit.
We will definitely do that. But when you say they started testing it for the first time,
Yes.
What had been done with it for, I mean, when was it discovered?
Yeah.
When was it first discovered? And then what were they doing with it before they finally started testing to say, hey, is this really the burial cloth of Christ?
Yeah. When was it first discovered? That's interesting. We have to do a little detective work to
All right.
take it back to the tomb, okay? Because if it's his, it goes to the tomb. So they wouldn't have come out, Bob, saying, look what we found on resurrection morning, because unclean. You're touching something that had blood, you know, from a corpse of a criminal. He wasn't a criminal, but condemned as a criminal.
Sure.
So they would have had reason, and they saw it. Peter and John got there, and they saw the linen cloths lying there. They'd have had reason to disguise it. Go ahead.
I'm maybe completely remembering my scripture wrong here,
Sure.
but didn't they say that the burial cloths were folded up neatly? Like as if he didn't just like rise and kick them off and go marching out, that he took time and tidied up a little bit? Is that how they were found?
The face cloth, it was referred to as the napkin about his head, not lying with the linen cloth, but wrapped together in a place by itself. We believe that face cloth was called the Sudarium of Oviedo, Spain. It's been there since 7th century. We believe it was a hood placed around the head of Jesus in death. Nothing dignifying, Bob, looking at a dead man's face back then or today. They covered it up.
Right.
So when they got to the tomb, they took that off, folded it up, put it over here, and then enshrouded him in the long cloth. When the image was formed, that face cloth was already away. So it was folded, but it was not the shroud that it
Okay.
was referring to. It was referring to other pieces
Okay.
of cloth.
So I wasn't
And
totally-
strips around the body as well that held the body, and there were other pieces. And this face cloth was folded by itself, but it wasn't the shroud.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, well that helps clarify it. I knew I remembered something about it being folded, and I'm just
Right.
kind of picturing that. So, okay, so we're going back to the tomb where we're saying this is
Yeah,
what,
yeah.
but they weren't going to come out and say, look what we found.
Right.
At what point were the images
Yeah.
on what is believed to be those
Yeah.
cloths found?
So
what's the
we
history
have
of
to
it?
go back to the first century. There was a king during the time of Jesus named Abgar, and he received, I'm not getting into the whole story, but he received from one of the disciples a face cloth with only the face on it. Only. He received it. It's in the historical record. The interesting thing about this, Bob, is the face cloth that this face of Christ was on was longer horizontally than it was vertically. Why is that important? Because when you fold the shroud 4 times, you double it 4 times, what do you get? You get a long horizontal aspect and a short vertical aspect with only the face in the middle. We believe what was given to Abgar was the shroud folded, disguised, and it wasn't discovered to be a full-length cloth until about the 10th century, when it was given to the Emperor of Constantine from Edessa, who sent an army there because now it's under Muslim control, and he says, we're getting this precious Christian artifact in our possession. So in 944 from Edessa. He takes this image of Edessa to Constantinople, and they find out it's a full-length cloth, 944 AD.
So nobody had unfolded it.
Nobody had unfolded it.
They just assumed this is what it was.
Correct. It was in a frame, but it was folded. And there are fold marks on the shroud which suggest exactly that sequence, what happened.
Okay.
So we believe we could take it back to the tomb. We have to do some detective work and say this looks like it was the image folded up. Nobody knew it. And when they got it in Constantinople, 944, historically they actually said and described the wounds of the full body.
Okay. Now, let's do chain of custody. Where did it go from that point?
Yeah.
Because, again, I want to get to the point wherever it ended up in whose hands did it end up in
Yes.
order to begin researching it, scientifically studying it,
Yes.
carbon dating it, and everything else that you talked about. So
Yeah.
there was a period of time.
There was, yeah. So in 944, it's taken from Edessa back to Constantinople, the Eastern Church, and it's there. It's historically recorded. From time to time, they bring it out, feast days, things like this. In 1204 AD, the city of Constantinople is sacked by Italian and French knights. The West sacks the East, and they take the shroud, disappears for 150 years. It shows up in Léré, France, in 1357. A guy named Geoffrey de Charnay, very noble knight, owns it, his family. Interesting, in 1204, one of the attackers of Constantinople was a knight, Geoffrey de Charnay. We believe it disappeared by the knights in 1204. It might have been the great-grandfather or grandfather of the 1357 Geoffrey de Charnay, who grabbed it in 1204, and then his family down through the years actually started to show it in 1357.
And what kind of a condition was it in as it's being grabbed and taken from place to
They
place?
said it was in
You
remarkable.
said it was framed.
Well, it was framed. Now, when they
Not framed like we would frame something under glass.
initially it was originally the image of Edessa, but what Constantinople did with it, I'm not sure. I know they had a contraption where they raised the body up in a box and lowered it every Friday. So they must have attached something to the shroud to actually raise it up and then lower it every Friday. But I'm not certain how they, kept it held as they. But it's been.
And you understand the reason why I'm asking, of course. It's kind of like in forensic evidence in criminal cases today, everything, not everything, but a large part of the authenticity is what about chain of command?
Yes, correct.
Because if we don't know who had it from point A to point B to point C and can prove that nothing was done to alter it or change it, if it's proven that the chain of custody can't be accounted for, it's non-reliable evidence.
Right. The historical evidence of the shroud is a little bit sketchy. You got to do some detective work, put some pieces together. We believe the folding of the shroud 4 times, which shows the horizontal, vertical, we believe that absolutely, and the fold marks on the shroud fit that theory. So from 1357, it's shown in Léré, France, by the de Charnay family. For about 100 years, they own it. It's in France. And the granddaughter of Geoffrey, 100 years later, exchanges it to the ruling monarchy of northern Italy and southern France at the time, known as the Savoy family. She's aged, she's elderly, she needs money for the rest of her life, and it's a good place to offer the shroud for safekeeping. She gives it to the Duke of Savoy's family, the ruling monarchy. In 1532, it's in a fire. That's when we're going to look at the fire damage initially. 1534, the shroud is patched and repaired by Poor Clare nuns of France. 1578, they move it over the Alps, the Savoy family, to Turin, where it's been since 1578. Why did they move it over? Because there was a guy in Borromeo, Milan, named Carlos of Borromeo, St. Charles of Borromeo. He was going to walk over the Alps to France to venerate the shroud, and the Savoy family says, no, we'll bring it over to him. So it's been in St. John the Baptist Church since 1578. 1898, the first photograph was taken, and that's when the photographic properties being reversed were discovered.
So 300 years from the time it finally arrived in what is now its current home, right? Turin.
Yes.
That's the first time it was ever photographed.
In 1898, 500, what was it, 1578, they moved it over. 1978 is when they had the large testing done by Stirp. What was
Okay.
that, 500-year anniversary from 1578?
So when they photographed it in
1898.
1898, so 15, so yeah, like 320 years-ish, or
Yes,
whatever,
yes.
from the time it got there. So it just sat there. Nobody wanted to do anything with it at that point. Well, I don't know when photography was invented. I probably should.
Yeah, mid-18th century.
But
yeah,
did anyone try to authenticate it during that period of time? Was there any record of that, or did that not start until we got into the 20th
It
century?
really didn't start until 1898. That's when science really took hold of it, with the properties being reversed.
Okay.
Prior to then, Bob, they would just bring it out on special occasions, feast days, weddings, things like that. But nothing was ever really done scientifically to it.
But it was accepted. Just this is the burial cloth of Christ, or was it presented as this is something that could be the burial cloth of Christ because of what you're about to show us, and
Yeah.
because of what is evident on those cloths, and,
Yeah.
and how remarkably similar it is to what is written in Scripture?
Yeah, the church in Rome has waffled on their pronouncements as to what it is. Some says it's an icon of his suffering, others it's a representation of the passion, and others, I think John Paul II was really the only one that said it's him, and it doesn't belong to us; it belongs to all of Christendom, he said.
So those who say it's an icon or a symbol, what do they think it is? That it was created, it was
That
manufactured
it was-
to be that?
Yes, in some
And these
way.
are some of the highest levels of the church.
Well, it's as incredulous as it sounds. My mind's made up. Don't confuse me with the facts, kind of thing. Like a friend of yours. Here today.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
so, unfortunately, yeah, you could show it to them, and for some reason they're just still.
But I'm just baffled by that.
Yeah,
Right?
well.
It's one thing for somebody who's just, a modern, 21st century person saying, yeah, I heard about it, or yeah, I even
Yeah.
saw a little bit about
Yeah.
it, but there's no way, blah, blah, blah. There's too many questions, some of which I'm going to pose to you as you
Yes,
kind of go
yeah.
through this. I'm going to
Yeah.
be every skeptic in the world.
The burden of
to
proof
try
is
to-
on the skeptic anymore. The burden of proof is on the skeptic.
Okay.
I really don't want to even engage in a conversation anymore with people about it being a
Yeah,
fake.
that's what you said at the beginning, because
Yeah.
this has been decided that it's not a fake.
Yes, it's
but
not a fake.
But the reason I'm bringing it up again is because what you just said, that the church has waffled as to whether or not it's
waffled, yeah,
fake
yeah.
and forged or created or it's authentic. So if the church itself, if anybody
Yeah.
would benefit from saying this is not a question, it is definitive. Now, forget about what David Onysko says. We
Yeah.
have said through the centuries,
Right.
this is the actual burial cloth of Christ.
Right.
They would
haven't.
benefit from that, but they're not willing to say that.
And I think it'd be good for business too.
Right? Yeah, right. I would think so too. But you know what I mean?
Yeah,
They're not
it
willing to
is-
say that definitively. That's pretty.
And I've talked to some real top intellectual people, and they just yet haven't pulled that string. And I just don't understand. You have all this ability, and you're not able to drop it from the head to the heart.
Right.
That's the faith, Bob.
Right.
That's it. And a lot of people just can't give that control up. And so, but that's what we have to do with it.
So I'm gonna start before I ask you to take us through these images. And David has been kind enough to bring these 8-foot long
By 4 foot,
replicas
yeah, right.
of the shroud.
Yes.
And you can tell me how those replicas were created in a moment. But
Right.
before we get into the presentation that you're going to give us here,
Yes.
when you say right out of the beginning that it was folded 4 times, it was
Yes.
doubled and then doubled again.
Yes.
I'm just thinking, if I've got, if I'm bleeding from the face or something like that, and I take a towel and I, mop my face with my blood and so forth, if I sit it down, the blood may stain in somewhat the shape of where my blood was coming from and wounds and so on and so forth. If I fold it up, and then I fold it up again, aren't I just going to get a bunch of smushes and smudges and globs, because anything that was individually recognizable when I take it off is going to mix in with one another, right?
No.
No.
It's 14 feet long and it's 3 feet 7 inches wide. And when it's folded, and I have on my PowerPoint, I have the fold, scheme, if you will.
Okay.
And when you fold it according to the fold scheme, the last fold is only the face. That's all that's left on the fold is the face. So depending on what end you start and how it's just not a spangled blob of blood.
Right.
It's literally freed up to see just the face, only the face.
And what about the rest of the body?
It's hidden because you only have so much of a horizontal aspect, if you will. The rest of the body is not seen. It's only the head. And that's what was given to Abgar. The image was only the face. And when you fold it, tetradiplone it's called, tetra, 4, diplone, doubled. Only been used 2 times in history, both to describe the shroud. Actually, one to describe the image of Edessa when it was only a face cloth. It was used to describe it, which is kind of, how did they know it was doubled in 4 unless they took and then when it was taken to Constantinople in 944, they described it doubled in 4. And when you do it according to that pattern, all you get is the face.
Just the face without the, okay.
Right.
All right. Well, David, I've talked to you about this on the radio a couple of different times, and I've seen some videos of your presentation, so I'm fascinated. But like I said, I'm going, and I get it. When you say, I'm done with the skeptics, okay, I'm going to present to you the facts here, and I think the way you have said it is that, look, this is either Christ or it's somebody who was killed and tortured identically to the way Christ was. Yes. That you can not believe it's Christ if you want to, but don't believe that this isn't real and that this happened to somebody that was wrapped in this cloth, right?
That's absolutely correct. Okay. That's where we're starting. We're not saying, well, it might be. No, and that might be a fake. It's not a fake.
But be that as it may, the skeptics that you correctly, I think I agree with you, and the skeptics don't deserve it. The burden of proof is on them. That's fine. But I think for any layperson that's watching this right now who is maybe not as familiar as you, particularly younger people, maybe in the Generation Z who haven't watched you since 1980 and all of these presentations, they might be, asking some of the questions in their heads, and I want you to answer them, so I'm going to have to give voice to them. Yes. If I can, as we go.
Yes.
Okay, so let's bring this up on our screen and tell us exactly what we're looking at and give us the lay of the land here.
Okay, well, what we're looking at are obviously 2 images of the shroud. They look different. The one on the right is what the cloth actually looks like. The cloth itself is a photographic negative. When it's photographed on the left, a positive image emerges in the darkroom. Nothing like this, no photograph that had, and by the way, it's 3-dimensional information on the shroud. Nothing like it. So you remember back
let me pause for just a minute. I apologize because these are pictures that we just took today, right? Of your images?
Are those from me? Oh, they're somewhere else. Okay. Yeah, it shows the contrast good.
Because the ones that you brought with you today, the ones that are hanging up outside in one of our, what are those? Those are recreations.
Yeah,
right?
On the left here, what we're seeing is a photographic positive, which is what those images are out there that you saw coming in. They're photographic positive images of the cloth. And I was going to say, remember back in the day, not you guys, but us, where you could take a photograph, you got your negative inside the camera that captured the light on the negative film, you get it developed, you get your negatives, I don't know what that is, and then you see your positives. Well, the cloth itself acts as the negative, and when it's photographed, a positive image emerges. And when, in 1898, when Secundo Pia, the first attorney, the first photographer took the pictures, said he almost dropped a large plate when that photographic positive came out because it's much more real, much more lifelike, distinct, clearer, and so it freaked him out, basically.
And that's the one we're seeing.
That's what we're looking at right now, a photo positive. Now, when we look at this, the thing that grabs our attention primarily are the large longitudinal lines on either side of the image in the middle. Yes, those white lines represent burn marks that were in the fire of 1532. Can you go back to the prior slide? You could see clearly on the right the burn, the scorch marks.
Yeah.
And then you see the white patches that were sewn on. after in 1532.
Those were the ones by the nuns, I think you
Yes,
said?
1534, the Port Clanner nuns. Now go to the next image that you. Okay, so what we have here is we have the reversal of the shroud itself. The anatomical limbs are reversed. It's like looking in a mirror, okay? So.
And these are life size? These are
Larger than life size.
These are larger than the actual shroud.
Yes,
Okay.
they're for the sake of presenting for the audience. They're 8 feet by 4 feet. The man in the shroud here in these pictures are 7 feet tall. However, in reality, the man in the shroud is between 5'10" and 6 feet, about 180 pounds.
Okay.
These are larger for presentation purposes.
Got it.
But we see those burn marks, and what was white, the white patches on the last slide, are now dark on the photo positive. Everything's reversed. Go to the previous one. What's dark on the right is light on the left.
Mm-hmm.
What's dark on the left is light on the right.
Mm-hmm.
The spear wound, look at the white triangle in the center, come down, right there. That's a spear wound, okay? Now, go over to the other side. It's on the left side here, see?
Sure.
It
makes sense, 'cause
reverses
it's reversed,
itself.
right.
But in reality, these are wrong images. It should be the opposite. But what we're seeing is the photo positive is opposite of the negative of the shroud itself. The shroud
Okay.
acts as a negative image.
Okay.
So we're seeing longitudinal burn marks, we're seeing patches, and we're seeing the frontal image of the man right through those damaged areas. Someone said it was as if God framed it. The only thing missing are the upper arms. The damage could have went right through the body, the fire, destroying the image.
What caused the fire?
Probably a candle fell over, and there was a little chapel, and they great risk to their lives. They saved it. It was in a silver box, folded up. A drop of silver dripped in the box on a corner. Remember in kindergarten class, you want to make a snowflake, you cut the corner, you open it up, you got the symmetrical burn marks. If it was a painting, which they say that's how it was forged, 900 degrees silver melts. What would have happened to the painting?
It would have dissolved, basically.
Totally.
Right? Yeah.
But yet it did.
But it's still there.
Go to the back side. Okay, again, you can see the horizontal, longitudinal lines going the length of the body. You see the patches, which are dark, yes, both above and below. And in the middle, clearly a man crucified. Now, in my presentations, Bob, I say this, and this is important. The words of Scripture that describe the weapons used by the Roman soldiers are seen in the wounds of the man in the shroud. Constantine outlawed crucifixion in the 4th century. This man was crucified prior to the 4th century. And so the wounds were caused by Roman weapons, which are described in the Word. That's no small piece of information there.
The Romans crucified a lot of
Thousands and thousands.
Yeah.
They were experts at it. They had no compulsion against doing it. Children, old ladies, didn't matter.
So that fact kind of gives us two things, I think. One, what you said earlier on, that if this isn't Christ, it's somebody else who was crucified, and if it was from this period of time, it was crucified by the Romans. This person was crucified by the Romans. So that kind of gives us a question, right? Is like, okay, well, so somebody was crucified. They crucified thousands. How do we know this particular certain individual would be Christ?
Well, interesting, the stigmata. We have thousands, Josephus, Tacitus, they've given us many historical accounts of crucifixion describing what happened during, after, the whole bit. When we come to Jesus, everything was unique that was done to him. He said he's a king, he needs a crown. Okay, they gave him a crown. This man wore a crown. His legs weren't broken, this man. He was speared in the side, same as Jesus. He's got a regal, royal, and we get to the face, we'll see that face. He's got a very peaceful, calm, repose, almost regal, When we take it all, the dirt, the pollen from the Jerusalem area, thorn pollens from bloom March and April of the year during Passover on his head. We add the preponderance of evidence. My father was a criminal defense attorney. I knew the term preponderance of evidence. When we take it, in this instance, it's like Occam's razor. It says, most likely, in many instances, the easiest explanation is the most likely.
Right.
And
I've heard that many times.
Yeah, and so when we look at how this man died, how he was crucified, what he wore, the special things done to Jesus, the special things done to him, the area, we're picking up geographical locations of where pollen grows and where dirt is only found indigenous to Israel. So, again, it's like, what are you, throwing out the baby with the bathwater here? What's going on? But again, they're hung up on the minors. They're hung up on the minors, and
right.
fail to see the big picture.
Well, let's look at the next big picture here, David, and take us to, I don't know where we're
Let's
going.
let's go to the head. Okay. All right. So if we take a look at the face, now the interesting thing about the face is there's no death mask. We've seen thousands of death masks, especially in Holocaust, the death camps, the torture, the suffering, the pain was permanently etched on that face in death. We've seen it many times in Holocaust pictures. We don't see a death mask on the man in the shroud. Now, I say this in my presentation. During Christmas, we recite, He's the mighty counselor, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. And that's what we see on that face. In spite of all the damage done to the body, we don't see a death mask. We see a peaceful, calm repose. That identifies it to one person, irrespective of the wounds. We can go to the
How do we explain that, though? Because I was going to ask you that anyway. When a few minutes ago, when you said that it's serene, repose. The trauma that he went through. If you read the scriptures, and you're going to just give us some really interesting information about things that were done to him that maybe scripture doesn't even cover.
Yes.
But with the trauma that his body went through before he died in the most violent and horrific way I can even imagine anybody dying.
Yes.
and suffering before that death.
Yes.
How is there not a death mask? I mean, he is human after all. And even if you're a Christian, you believe he is God and human at the same time, and actually Holy Spirit as well, and the Holy Trinity. But part of that is human, and human suffering is one of the things that we think about when we think about the Passion. So he did suffer as a human.
Yes.
He had the pain and the feeling of a human being even through his divinity. So why isn't that human agony on that face?
That's a good question. I don't know I have the answer to it, but I will say that Jesus is peace, literally. He's also light. In the body, the image came from the body. It's a light source. We believe radiation from the body. But he is peace. That's who he is. He's the Prince of Peace. So because he's that, all the damage done to him could not overcome who he is. I think that's one of the reasons. The second reason, might be what other way to convince people that it's him when you look at that face, that calm, peaceful repose, not a hideous, contorted, tortured visage. I think it just lends itself to, he is the Prince of Peace, But in my presentations, Bob, I say it's not natural not to have that death mask. Supernatural, maybe?
That's a fair way to look at it. There's one other question before you move on about the face. A lot of researchers and historians and even biblical historians have essentially said, that image that we all grew up with of Jesus as a white man with white features and long straight hippie type hair and beard and so on and so forth. There were no drawings of Jesus from that time. Correct. This is what we have created ourselves to believe. But what a real Arab Jewish man would have looked like at that time would have been very, very different.
Yeah,
than
probably
that.
olive skin, dark
Olive skin,
yeah,
probably
yeah.
more curly haired,
yes.
and so forth, and maybe or maybe not had a full beard, because
Right.
even some of the disciples aren't depicted as having beards. So again, the shroud would tell us no, it's exactly like everything that we've drawn and everything that we've come to believe Christ would have looked like, not that olive skinned individual we just described. How do you address that?
Can you reframe that again? Just give it to me one more time.
Well, I'm basically saying that image on our screen right now and from the shroud would, I think, pretty much be emblematic of what our taught vision of what Christ looked like is, rather than what the new researchers are saying that Jesus, what an adult Jewish male living in that region of the world at that time would have looked like.
Right. Well, we do know that when the image of Edessa was rediscovered, and I didn't get into that, but it was in the 6th century. Up to the 6th century, all the images, mosaics, paintings of Jesus, frescoes, would show him Roman-like as a youth. No beard, curly hair, youthful face. Those were what the depictions of Jesus, some of them are in the catacombs, prior to the 6th century. In the 6th century, the image of Edessa, I didn't get into it, but it was rediscovered, and from the 6th century on, all the images of Jesus changed from a boyish, youthful-looking, curly-haired Roman boy to what we see, owlish eyes, long nose, full mustache, full beard, full long hair. It all changed. We believe it was because that image of Edessa, which became the shroud after we discovered it was folded, that face was used for all the paintings and depictions of Jesus from the 6th century onward. Long hair, darker complexion, owlish eyes, long nose. So, today, they want to contemporize him, I guess.
Yeah.
And it
Good way
just
to say
wasn't.
it.
It just wasn't the case. It was, as you said, he's in the Carlton Kuhn, who is no longer here. He was a very famous ethnologist, anthropologist. He said of the man in the shroud, he was a real man, and he was of a physical type, Sephardic Jew or noble Arab, is what he said. He places him in the Middle East, and the Sephardic are the Middle Eastern, Ashkenazi or European, but he places him in the Middle East, and if you're going to be honest, they're olive complected. They're darker skinned.
Sure.
You're
Nothing wrong
right.
with that.
Probably
That's just-
curly hair. You're right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. All right. And obviously, skin complexion isn't
Yes,
something we'd be
yes.
able to tell from
Yeah.
from what we're looking at the shroud.
Yes.
But now, what I do want to ask you about is all of the markings that you see around the head, of the
Yes.
forehead area,
Yes.
and you can take us through that.
Yes.
Like I
Yes.
said, I've seen your presentations
Yes.
talking about this is more than just a crown of thorns, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a helmet. It covered the whole scalp. It wasn't a wreath or a circle. That was like a victor's crown. This was covered the whole scalp. Think about it. They were warming themselves by the fire at night. They're in the courtyard. They tried Jesus at night. Someone said he's a king. He needs a crown. They went over to the bushes that served as the kindling for the fire, grabbed a bunch of branches, probably put a rope on it, pulled it down, struck him on the head, beating him, causing it to dig into the scalp more and more. It's very vascular. It bleeds like nobody's business. So he has dozens of puncture wounds in his head, most likely from thorns. Only one other person in history has ever been crowned with thorns, and why would they be? Well, this guy said he was a crown, so we'll give him one. So when you said, could it be someone else? Would it seem kind of a sadistic thing to do to someone, just to mimic the suffering of Jesus? But if we look above, it would be the right eye facing us, the other side. Yeah, facing. Right above, see the blood in two different directions.
I do.
That may have come from an arterial spurting. Go over to the, right, move up into the, right there, in the apex, right there. Mm-hmm. That thorn might have been there, and it spurted in two different directions. That appears to be arterial blood flow. It looks like a number 3 in the middle of the forehead. This would have been a slow, venous blood flow flowing over the furrowed brow, the painful furrowed brow. Someone said, hey man, second person in the Trinity.
Someone did say that.
Interesting.
Yes.
So
well, I never even thought about that 3. I mean,
yeah.
it does, yeah. Now that you say
Second
it,
person
yeah.
in the Trinity.
I like it.
So there are dozens, and we'll see more puncture wounds when we get to the backside. But so as we come down the face, we see the tremendous puncture wounds from the thorns. The right eye, go to the right eye, facing us. Yeah, right there. Underneath, there looks like a large bruise and swelling. Right there. It looks like an egg.
Yeah, it does.
See it? Looks like an egg. Okay, so he was beaten in the face. Go to the bridge of the nose. Right there. His nose is separated, broken, if you will. Bruises above and below both eyes. Some of it, we don't have the right equipment. The tip of his nose is missing with dirt ground in it. You can't see it, but it's not there. Dirt ground in it. There's dirt ground in the tip of the nose. He's got no skin on the sole of his left knee and dirt on the soles of his feet, which come from the limestone quarries of Jerusalem. I believe we have the tip of the nose.
How were they able to determine that, David?
Well, because they've actually gone into tombs, and the streets of Jerusalem were made by the limestone quarries, and they looked at the dirt on the feet and the tip of the nose and the knee, and they matched it to spectra samples from the tombs and the streets, and identical.
So the dirt of Jerusalem is different than the dirt everywhere else?
Well, I mean, there's a certain mineral in this particular area, travertine aragonite, which is indigenous only to Jerusalem. That's what we see on the Man of the Shroud.
So it is.
So it is. This specific mineral. There's limestone elsewhere in the world, but this mineral of this limestone is only indigenous.
And the scientists were able to, take a sample of the dirt from the actual shroud and then
compare
compare that to
yes.
the mineral in the actual dirt?
Yes, correct. And
how were they allowed to do that? Same thing with the carbon dating, I guess, which we have to address here in a moment. But how, given the protective nature, of course, of the shroud, especially after the fire and then the repair and so on and so forth, who gave them the okay to let's scrape a little dirt off of the shroud of Christ?
Well, actually, they didn't scrape it. They put Scotch tape over it.
Okay.
And they sticky tape samples.
Okay.
And they lift it off, and caught between the threads and the fibers is evidence that you can't get anywhere. And so that's where they saw it, on the sticky tape samples, which I looked at, by the way, under a microscope with my own eyes. I looked at the blood of Christ. It takes away the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Like I said, Bob, all I wanted to do was read a magazine article.
I know, and look at what it did.
Yes.
And I'm all in here. Where is that tape?
Yes, that tape is with certain people in America. It's protected and mothballed, and I mean, they bring
never
it out.
to be displayed.
Oh, well, not to you and I. I mean, well, maybe.
Well, you got
maybe
some.
me.
Yeah, you got
me.
some
maybe
sway
not to
here.
You, but, yeah, but yes, if I wanted to go see it, and I know people and everything, yeah, I'd probably get to be able to see it. But it's under lock and key, and they're still examining it. I mean, you're talking about. I mean, they've found wax on these tapes. People held candles over it for centuries. The wings of flies. I mean, DNA. People have touched it, kissed it. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff on it.
I'm just curious because, again, you are obviously a researcher, and how did you manage? I'm sure there's a lot of people who would like to see the blood of Christ under a microscope. How did you get that access?
Amazing. Well, I had belonged to a number of publications that published shroud research. One of them, he and his wife, they were professors down at Duke University. They're out of North Carolina. And they sent out, and they had the Max Fry tapes. They had them. Over 58 different type of pollen species lifted off the surface. And so in their newsletter, they said, with a donation, they will let you see and they knew I was a researcher, so I sent them some money, stayed in their house, and saw some things that I saw blood on a slide, which I believe came from the Lamb of God. And I looked at it, Bob. I wouldn't stop. I kept looking at it and looking at it. And pollen particles that you can see the spines and the thorns that are microscopic. Now, if this thing was a medieval forgery, that forger would have had to have known about pollen and dirt that he couldn't see before the invention of the microscope. Now, come on. That's what he would have had to have known all that before he could even check his work.
And these are the kind of things that make you be like, I'm
I'm
done
not
with
even
the skeptics.
talking about it anymore.
I'm done with the
Yes.
skeptics. This is real. It is from the time that we say it is.
Yes.
The injuries that were done to this individual are consistent with what the Bible has said.
Yes, yes.
So it's either Christ or it's somebody who suffered exactly as Christ did.
Exactly. That's it.
Which, I don't want to get too far because I want to get back into this.
Yeah.
Because when you look at the various depictions of the way that the disciples were crucified, or I'm sorry, were killed. Some of them were crucified. Some of them said, "I'm not worthy of being crucified
Peter.
like him." Crucified
Peter,
upside down, one on an X instead
Yes,
of on
yes.
an X. So all of the, but the point being, there may be some Christians who defended Christ, believed in Christ, and were made to suffer as Christ suffered.
Right. That's
Possible,
it's possible.
I suppose.
It is
all the way
possible.
down to the
Yeah.
crown. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm just.
Right.
But the point is, the one thing we don't know is if that is Christ, but we do know that this is somebody who was crucified just like him from that same era.
Correct.
Now, before you go on to the next slide,
Yes.
tell us about the carbon dating.
Yes.
Because the story goes that they carbon dated the material of the shroud, and it did not
Yes.
match up with the time of Christ and the
Yes.
time of his crucifixion. And you said what? You say what to them?
Yeah. Can we show a full-length picture of the shroud? On the right side, you can barely see it, but on the right side is a white line. It's about right there, all the way down.
Mm-hmm.
Go all the way down to the bottom. Okay, see on the bottom that black square? That is actually white. It's not black because there's a backing cloth behind it. That black is a backing cloth. The reason I'm saying that white line coming down, it's called the side strip. They took the sample from the side strip, not the main body of the shroud, which they said they would. They said they were going to tease 7 threads out from 7 different areas of the main body, give it to 7 different laboratories, and you got your carbon date. They took it instead from the most highly contaminated part of the shroud, which they knew before going there. They vowed not to go there, and they did at the last minute. Unbeknownst to anybody, the people taking the sample took one sample from that strip, which when they hold it up, Bob, they hold it horizontally. So for centuries, there's 6, 8, 10 people holding a 14-foot cloth to show the people. What happens to fabric after you hold it and you manhandle it for years? It fades.
Well, this goes into that chain of custody question I talked about before. The chain of custody of the shroud itself could be impacting not just the evidence of Christ's image there, but the evidence of the date of the cloth.
Subsequent, yes. And so what happened was they took the sample from the most highly contaminated part of the shroud. They vowed they wouldn't do it. They did. And subsequent to the test, it was discovered that area was part of a reweave. It's called an invisible French weave. You can Google it online and watch a time-lapse photography. You wouldn't know what was real and what was added by the time they were done. An invisible French weave. They didn't know about it till after the test. They tested a sample from a medieval repair is what they tested. And they didn't know it until after the test. It was discovered.
So once that was discovered, why not do another test? Why not pull some threads from the center of it? But
excellent question. They blew it so badly the first time and caught so much heat that for all these years they have just hesitated. I know a number of researchers, friends of mine, who submitted proposals for new testing. They don't even get answers back. However, in 2028, it will be the 40th anniversary of the carbon dating, 88, and it'll be the 50th anniversary of the 78 STIRP testing. They're big on anniversaries.
Okay.
I'm thinking in 28, they're going to have a public exhibition and they're going to allow further testing.
Wow.
That's what I'm thinking.
Gosh, I hope they do.
Yeah.
I really do. Because, I mean, the stuff you're presenting is already compelling enough, but if they could get past that, that quote-unquote debunking
because Bob, when it was on the news and the newspaper, shroud's a hoax, forgery, fake.
Yeah.
How often have you heard from the lamestream media that they took it from a sample that was
never heard it?
Never.
Just was told that it was the shroud. They carbon dated the shroud.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to the next next slide, or
let's go down to the spear wound. Okay. show the black patch. Yeah, okay, there's the, it's white on the cloth, but here, photo positive. And now go to the spear wound and show show that slice at the top. Okay, that's 4 centimeters, that slice between the 5th and 6th rib, and it would have entered the right atrium, which fills with blood upon death, and the blood, the white underneath it, all that white is post-mortem blood after death. So he was speared.
How do we know that?
Well, hematologists know it. I don't know that I would know it, but they know after death.
When I say we, I mean those who have studied this.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
they've determined it's post-mortem, it's not pre-mortem.
Okay.
And so his legs weren't broken. He was speared in the side after death. Who does it sound like? In the middle, you see a diamond shape. In the fire of 1532, in order to douse the fire, they threw water, and the steam that created these diamond shapes on the center of the body. And
The part about the legs being broken too is important.
yeah, go all the way down to the legs. Now you can see they're the knees. Okay, now look how straight them legs are, both of them.
Right.
Now go up to the spear wound. So his legs weren't broken, but one of the soldiers pierced his side. Can you go to the back? Can you go to the back right now? Blood and water. See below, all blood and water right there on the small of the back.
Oh.
Right there is all blood and water that came from that spear wound. Go back to the front now. Okay. So it's all scriptural. And immediately there came out blood and water. There it is on the back. The blood came out first because it's thicker than water and heavier. And so, okay, so there's the spear wound. Go to the abdomen. The abdomen is swollen, which is indicative of someone struggling to breathe. That's indicative. Okay, go to you see the loins, the private area is completely crossed. Nothing can be seen. Go to
let me ask about that. When I first saw this too, I thought it's interesting that they laid him in the tomb with his hands covering his groin, as you say, as opposed to what most of us have seen in funerals when people are laid to rest. Their hands are usually on their chest. Why would they have positioned his hands like that?
They've done both.
Oh, really?
They've done both. So for this particular, it might have been modesty reasons. You know, they would have had to have broken the rigor mortis. The arms would have been in rigor, so they would have had to have manually brought him over.
Right.
So I'm thinking modesty, perhaps, and
Okay.
then they would do it either way.
Considering that he was then covered by the shroud.
Right.
You know, again, I'm thinking again, would there be a need for the modesty of the hands to be over his groin if he's going to be undercover for what they believed at the time forever.
Well, maybe
for all of eternity in a tomb, never to be seen again anyway.
Well, if God knew he was going to bring it out, he might have said, you know,
that's where I'm going with this.
I know,
I'm just
brother.
kind of curious.
I know. I like it. I like it. This is good.
This
is good.
If there was going to be a negative image of him that was going to be left on the shroud for proof that he has risen from the dead, if that was what the Bible foretold, if that is what God wrote, essentially, then he was going to make it, the modesty, be a part of this. I mean,
yes.
I can't figure out another reason why a
Right.
body that's never going to be seen again, they would be so careful to cover the private area with hands.
Good point.
So
Good point. Now, you look at the right hand. Actually, look at the left hand. The left hand is over the right wrist, but the right hand is on the left thigh. It's because the right shoulder is dislocated. That's why.
And did that happen as a result of carrying the cross, or do we know that?
Who know? Don't know.
Okay.
You know, the slumping of the body could have just, you know.
Do you have close-ups of the hands too that we're going to get to? Because I mean, more than this, yeah. And the reason I'm asking, of course, is I'm looking at those bright spots.
Yeah.
And there has been a dispute among, I don't know, everybody, not just religious scholars, but mostly, I suppose, about whether or not he was crucified through the wrists or through the palms, because what many have said, physiologists have said, the palm would not support, it would have just ripped.
They've actually done
So-
studies with cadavers in World War
Yeah.
II, French surgeon. We've learned a lot about crucifixion because of the shroud. Within minutes, it rips through. Not strong enough, you're writhing, you're agony, you're roiling up there. But through the wrist, and it separates the carpal tunnels, the carpal bones, so it doesn't break any bones.
Right.
And
It goes like right between the radius and the ulna, so it kind of provides a.
yes, absolutely, on the forearm there.
So is that what we're seeing here? That bright.
We're looking, yeah, right there is
White
the
spot.
hole in the wrist. Yes, it wasn't through the palm. The original language, Greek, hand means chire, fingertips to elbow.
Oh,
So it's inclusive of the wrist.
okay.
So he took a nail. You don't see any thumbs. The reason you don't see any thumb, you might see right there, right there. That might be a thumb folded into the palm, because the median nerve, those who have carpal tunnel will tell you about it. When it's stimulated, it's so painful.
Yeah.
Medical doctors
Can't even
said
fathom.
one of the most painful, you could pass out from carpal tunnel. It's that bad. But it caused the thumb to jerk into the palm. And so we think that white that you just showed, the thumb right there, that might be the thumb, kind of an x-ray through the hands showing the thumb. But the fingers are long because the fingers go through the back of the hand to the wrist. You're not looking at the back of a palm, you're looking at bones going all the way to the wrist. So there's an x-ray quality to it. The thumbs are in the palms. Right.
What about the nail marks on the feet? Do we have the feet?
Yeah, well, that would be.
I don't know if they're displayed.
That would be on the back side.
There we go.
Okay, so it's about, and you could see toes. You could actually see toes. See them?
I do.
And
Is
right,
that blood? Is all of that white blood?
yeah, all of the white's blood. But above those toes, you can't see it. Down a little bit. Right about there is a red square, which we believe is where the nail
Okay.
came through.
Okay.
And then off the ankle, up top there, probably blood just rolled up and off the ankle. Right there, yeah.
So, tell me, David, was the shroud wrapped around him like taut, like as if? I'm trying to figure out a way to describe that, because I'm picturing myself or anybody else lying under a sheet in your bed. The sheet lays over you. It's not gripping every part of your body so that you would see, one would think, your knuckles and your hands and so on and so forth, to leave even the blood, to leave the specific definitive thing, including what you're going to show us on the back, the gruesome nature of the scourging and so forth. But everything is visible as if the cloth was like hugging him, not just lying over him. Is that?
Yes, it would have been, almost maybe even molded in, kind of, to keep it, and then they would have strips tied around it to hold it next to the body.
So strips around like the arms?
Yeah,
like
the arms, the knees.
So that it would be kind of like sucked tight up against
sucked
him.
tight up against it, yes.
And
yes.
be able to see all of those
Yes,
things.
yes.
Okay.
And the blood was a body contact transfer. That's how the blood got on. The image is an entirely different nature, which we'll get to before we wrap up. I got to get to how the image might have been formed.
Take us there now if you want.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Well, the image, you have two types of images on the shroud. You have blood images and you have body images. The blood images got on the cloth from direct body contact transfer, soaked in, adhesing to the body. The image of the body formation is this. The shroud is made up of threads. Those threads are made up of fibers, fiber being about as thick as a human hair. Take 100 fibers, weave them together, wrap them up, and you got a thread, okay? You look at the threads under a microscope on the shroud, the top 2 fibers of 100 have been chemically dehydrated and oxidized. They've turned yellow, straw-like. Only the top 2 fibers. Take a needle, you lift up the top 2, the 100 or the 98 fibers beneath that make up the thread are pure white, just like they were when they were manufactured in the shop. So, what caused only the fiber, top 2 of 100, to change color? Well, we believe it was radiation, which came from the body. It's not external light. When you take a photograph, you got or the sun. The light source was the body itself. Now,
So this is where we have to buy his divinity, because human beings don't give off radiation.
not
Right?
normally. Not normally.
Right.
Some, they could get hot sometimes. Corpses can get hot.
Sure. But that's different than projecting a light source.
That's correct.
That has to be what we're saying, those who are believers,
Yes.
is divinity.
Yes. So they were able, about 10 years ago, scientists in Italy were able to duplicate one fiber with the discoloration color the same, using one laser beam in a vacuum. You ready? It took 2 to 5 billion watts of power at 1/40 billionth of a second to duplicate the coloration of one fiber using one laser beam. The scientists said, there's not enough power in the universe to make this thing. And I say, I think I know someone who has the power.
Well, that's a very, again, I said when we started, I'm going to be every skeptic. I'm
Yes,
going to try
yes.
to, but there are some things you cannot explain.
Yeah. Now let me add to this that the buttocks of the man in the shroud are rounded; they're not flat. About 180 pounds. If this image was created while he was lying flat on his back, that buttocks would not be rounded.
Right?
It's believed by a scientist that I really respect that the body was levitating prior to resurrection, and that the top half and the bottom half of the cloth were pulled taut and acted as photographic plates, so that when the radiation happened in a millisecond of time, it captured. There were aloes, he was wrapped in aloes and different spices, which seem to, in some scientists' studies, seem to indicate that there's a light sensitivity to the cloth because of the adding of those spices and ointments.
Okay. Now we're getting into a different area here. You're saying if the body was levitating and therefore things being pulled taut, it was literally, this was God taking the picture
Yes.
with the radiation-esque
Yes.
imagery and light source that you talked about, so that this could be discovered to prove that Jesus was who he says he was, and that he did what God and the Bible says he
Just
did,
as
which
the
is
doubting
rise.
Thomas needed something, the
There
21st
it
century
is.
shows.
Okay. But when you just talked about the aloes and the other spices and body oils that were used to clean up a corpse before burial or internment.
And to disguise the smell.
Okay. I already know what a skeptic is going to say because it came into my head. If they cleaned him up, put on the aloes, put on the spices, put on the oils, wanted to make the body prepared for eternal internment, why is all of that blood still all over it? Why wouldn't they have cleaned that blood off of him as they oiled him and aloed him? That's what a skeptic is going to say.
there's some suggestion that the spices and the ointments were actually packed next to the body. They weren't on the body.
Oh.
They were packed around the body, okay, to arrest the smell and the decay of the body, which, by the way, there's no decay, no body rot, which happens in day 4. This thing left the cloth in day maybe 3. So that may be one of the reasons. Also, blood oozes. Blood oozes. You can cut yourself, put a bandage on, take it off 2 hours later, and it oozed onto the spangled
If
out.
you're still alive. But if you're not and your heart isn't pumping anymore,
no,
it's
no,
probably
it's
not
the-
pushing blood
No,
out
it still oozes blood. I've triple checked
on a
that with
corpse.
foreigners.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
with a corpse. So, and then so it.
So even if they did clean him up, which
Yes.
one would think that they did,
Yes.
and obviously they took the care and the time to place his hands as they did and so
Yeah,
forth.
they couldn't clean him very quick, much because the sun was setting. They had to bury him, but I believe there was some kind of a soaking of some kind to get some of that top stuff
Right.
off or whatever it might be.
Right.
And then it stuck to the blood stuck to the
To the fabric.
to the fabric,
Right,
and then
right.
when it was pulled taut, it was popped off and stayed on, and
And then the flash of light or whatever radiation type thing
Right.
that made the fabric threads change.
Yeah.
Or
Yes.
the top layers.
top
that is.
top fibers, yeah,
Amazing.
top fibers.
Okay, we don't have a ton of time left here. You have a lot of other
Yeah.
slides and information to share. I'm going to let you take us
Yeah,
through
let's
the
go
last
to the
couple of
back.
things. Okay.
Let's go to the head. And can we zoom in? Yeah, okay, so you can clearly see many, many, many puncture wounds in the head. And medical doctors have said, we were not made to withstand this pain. We would pass out. We'd become unconscious. But yet we know, and obviously this crown of thorns would have been grading up and down the cross, the breathing, the respiration, so pushing deeper and deeper into the skull. Unique to Christ, yet this man also wore a helmet of thorns, So who else could it be? Go to the ponytail, straight down. We think that white line might be his hair gathered in the back to the middle of the back.
That's the first time I have ever heard anybody, and I'm a Christian and a Catholic, so I've grown up in the church, and I've never heard anybody mention Jesus with a ponytail.
Yeah.
Why would they have taken the time to tie his hair back as they were crucifying him and torturing him and whipping him and everything else? Or was he just taken to Pilate that way? Maybe he was just wearing it that way and taken to Pilate, and so therefore it stayed that way through the whole ordeal. Or do you think this was post-mortem, that they when they readied his body for burial, they pulled it back?
It's possible. It's possible it might be post-mortem because there's another cloth, Sudarium of Oviedo. That's the one we talked about.
The one in Spain you're talking about?
Yes, it was the hood placed around his head. And some have suggested, Shroud researchers, that when they put that hood around his head, they gathered that hair in the back and kind of just rearranged it, refashioned it with the hood.
So even if it wasn't in a ponytail like people wear today, like with an actual tie,
right,
it was just pulled back.
It was just pulled back, rope way.
Yes,
rope
to be more neat with that hood. Around.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a suggestion. It's not 100%.
Well, no, and I get it, and we're all trying to figure this out, obviously.
Right.
And by the way, you keep referring to Shroud researchers, and you keep saying we. How big is this community of Shroud researchers? How many people like you are out there?
All over the world, almost in every country. Not a lot of them.
That's what but I mean, literally. I mean, do we have a ballpark number? Are we talking 1,000, 100,000?
I'd have to say
10?
At least 1,000.
Okay.
At least, who are real serious about it and dedicate their life to it. At least in many countries, Spain, France, Italy, America, Portugal.
Did most of those individuals get the access you did? For example, to see the tape under the slide and so forth. No, you had some real pull. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Okay. What else did you want to show us?
So go to the shoulders. Show the shoulders. Okay. Very powerfully built, they said. 5'10" to 6 feet, about 180 pounds. Very powerfully built. Now, from his shoulders down to the tip of the ponytail, in that horizontal area right there and up to the top of the shoulders, there appears to be a chafening of those wounds as if he carried something very heavy. Can't see it very well in this picture, but there appears to be a widening, a chafening of the wounds in the shoulder area.
The whip marks, the scourge marks.
The scourge marks, which suggest that he carried a heavy beam, something that roughed up those.
So can you see the difference between the scourge marks on the back versus the front? Because he wouldn't have carried a beam on his front, of course. Is that what you mean when you say a chafening? Do you see a difference between the two?
Well, with the right equipment, you can. With what we're looking at, you really can't.
Right. Yeah, these are pictures we just took here of your samples.
Yes,
your replicas.
So yes, they could see it. So that says he didn't carry the whole cross. This is some of the things we've learned with the shroud. Pictures carrying the whole thing after being beaten within an inch of his life. Never could have. That would have weighed 300 pounds.
Oh.
The stipes. The vertical piece always waiting for the next victim. The patibulum, the horizontal beam, about 100 pounds, tied on. They were tied at the ankles so they don't run away. They're surrounded. So he wouldn't have been able to.
He's only carrying that part.
That part,
yeah. Because the other part is always mounted in the ground.
Correct, at the site.
Because they, as we said, they've crucified thousands of people.
Thousands.
Right.
So he fell. That maybe that's where the tip of the nose is missing with dirt ground in it. Certainly the knee. He must have fell on that knee because there's no skin on it. Not the right, the left. So that must have been one that hit first, And then the dirt on the feet. So the knee, the nose, and the feet, limestone dirt. So he's been flogged from his shoulders all the way down to his heels, both sides of his body, not so much on the chest in front. I believe he was flogged with his hands above his head, between 100 and 200 strokes. One man was taller than the other because the angle of the strokes are different. And
not that I want to hear this because it's hard, to.
I've wept over the years studying this thing.
But people who don't know should know, we're not just talking about raw hide. We're not just talking about leather whips. We're talking about much more gruesome torture devices here that he was struck with.
Yeah, in my
covered
research, I've discovered 3 types of flagrums. One was made with, this man was scourged with lead balls shaped like dumbbells, and you can clearly see a few of them. But and also broken pottery they would use, and sharpened sheep knuckles. And I got some of those from the West Side Market. Guy says, "What do you want?" I says, "Sheep knuckles. I'm going to make a scourge." So they may use sheep knuckles, broken pottery, and lead balls, probably with spikes around them.
So these are the things that, when they strike the flesh, they're not just striping the flesh; they're grabbing the flesh and ripping it
out
as it comes out.
Yeah. Passion of the Christ used an instrument called the scorpion. That was a little bit too,
You have no
gratuitously.
No evidence of that.
Not really.
But that probably existed at the time. I mean,
oh yeah,
they were masters of torture.
Sure
the Romans, and they didn't even blink.
Oh yeah, and remember, Pilate didn't want to have anything to do with him. He wanted to let him go, and so he succumbed to the mob. And I believe he told the Romans, "Lay into this guy. That'll do it for him. That'll satisfy them." Because you weren't supposed to be flogged within an inch of your life if you were going to be crucified. Because if the Roman soldiers did it excessively and you died, they killed them because they failed their mission.
Right.
So Jesus wasn't supposed to be flogged that severely. I'm sorry, if he was going to be crucified initially, they would have flogged him lightly. They weren't going to crucify him, so Pilate said,
so the flogging,
lay into him. Should have been enough.
That's when he was going to let him go.
That's when he was going to let him go.
Beat him as bad as you can. We'll show everybody how bad that is, and they'll say, "Okay, good."
Okay, good. Yeah. And so,
but the fact that he survived that at all.
Medical doctors don't even know how he carried his cross after the flogging. They said, "How could
he carried his body weight? Forget the cross. How could he stand?"
But you know what, Bob, and I really mean this. It was his mission. They would have had to drag me and you after the first stroke. It was his mission. I bet when he fell on his knees and just hugged that cross, knowing, okay, now we're going to get somewhere. Yeah. It's really, it's can't even imagine. So we have between 100 and 200 flog marks. On the small of the back, you see the blood in the water from the small of the back, the spear wound. Keep going down. The scourge wounds all through the buttocks. The buttocks is rounded. There's the buttocks. There's the back of the thighs. Look at all the ones in the back of the thighs.
Nobody thinks of that.
Nasty
When
ones.
you think of the scourging, the whipping, you just think it's all on the back.
Right.
Or maybe the chest. They don't know they did the entire length of the
whole body, front and back. Only the chest area. And all the way down to the heels. Now here's the sole of the right foot, completely covered in blood. You only see blood on the heel area of the left foot. It's kind of turned inward. You can't see it very well. But it's in rigor mortis. It's turned inward. And,
Were the heels or the feet crucified one on top of
the
other,
left
or side by side?
left foot on top of the right instep.
So one nail.
On top, one nail, yes. So that's, front and back. And then go back to the front and the face again. And again, after all this damage, we see this face. And we say, wait a minute. How could this be? Well, who he really, his true nature, God is light, Jesus is light. This was made by light. Kind of fits. Jesus is peace, the Prince. Kind of fits. But everything else, this floats my boat. 40 years ago, plus, it got my attention. It's never left. And it's only asked more questions than it's answered.
When you do presentations, how many of these do you do a year on average?
Not enough.
Okay.
I'd say it depends year to year. During Lent, that's the big season.
Sure, yeah.
I'd say between 10 and 20.
Okay, so you've presented to thousands of people through the years.
Yes, thousands.
Do more people walk away convinced that yes, this is the burial cloth of Christ, or do they walk away maybe not? What are you getting reactions?
The former.
Yeah,
that they believe it is. Yeah, people have come up to me and full of emotion, wept in front of me and just said, can't believe, what they've seen.
I feel like crying right now just
Holy
looking
Spirit.
at the
Oh,
looking
yeah.
whatever
Oh.
whether that's Jesus Christ or some random Jew who was tortured as Christ was. I'm just it's very, very hard to even comprehend.
Yes.
And I feel a deep sense of sadness and agony for whomever it was. But the fact that these images are left here and they cannot be recreated, according to what you just described, with what scientists have said, with enough power of light and a flash to do this, I don't know how anybody can say there's not something here that's unexplainable. And if it's unexplainable, then it requires faith to believe it.
Yes.
Right?
That's
Isn't
right.
that the definition of faith?
That's right.
The belief in something for which there is no evidence.
Yeah.
There's no way to, how did light happen to make those images on that cloth and have that survive the centuries?
Yes.
There has to be something you can understand, and that would have to be divinity, providential.
And when we look at how a man, Jesus, and we see what I believe to be his passion on the cloth, there's only one answer as to why. And that's love. That's the only answer, is love. What would compel him? And the damage is so severe. The scourge marks are so severe. Remember, Jesus is the Lamb of God. Well, they led the lamb to the slaughter. The lamb didn't know. He didn't open his mouth. He just went and it happened. I wonder,
But
Bob.
he knew.
I wonder, Bob. Yeah, but I wonder, did they damage him so severely because he never opened his mouth? He would never give them the satisfaction. He was the lamb led to the slaughter silently, and he wasn't going to open his mouth. Is that why it was so brutal? I don't know, but it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, because he knew what was coming.
He knew
That's
it
why
was
he
coming.
prayed in the garden.
He sweat blood in the garden, and
Yeah.
that's a medical condition we saw in World War II Holocaust camps. When you know you're doomed, when you know it, the pressure is so intense, capillaries burst, mixed with sweat glands, you sweat blood. And Luke, the physician, told us that account.
I wonder how much blood he even had left in his body at the time of his death.
Bible says, that's a very good point. In Psalm 22, David speaks the words of Jesus. 1,000 years before crucifixion, he said, "I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint." He was seriously dehydrated. Seriously. The only time he drank was at the Last Supper. Garden, he sweat blood. What do they give him? Vinegar? Vinegar. He had nothing. Tongue stuck to his mouth. It was terrible.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it is a fascinating artifact, obviously, and the research that you and so many others have done is incredible. We have it on the screen. We're going to have it on the screen, right? David's website. Do you have
I don't have a website. I just
What do
have
we
my
have?
my phone number and email. That's it, Bob.
Okay. Well, what we will throw up there then is a link to some of your actual stage presentations
Yeah,
you've
do
given,
that.
which are much more in depth than we were able to
Yes.
cover here,
Yes.
because I want more people to get as much information about this as possible.
Yes.
Are there any sites that you do recommend? Any other Shroud?
Shroud.com, www.shroud.com,
Okay.
the largest and the most, the best website in the world. Barry Schwartz, the documenting photographer in 1978 who took the Shroud image pictures, is the host of that, and he's a personal friend. I've been to his home. I know a lot of these guys real well. That allows me, Bob, to what I bring to the table is pretty good stuff.
Yeah. Well,
know.
I'll tell you what.
right.
I've been convinced from previous conversations with you, and not to mention just a lot of it is a matter of faith.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know all of the answers,
Right.
and so I'm trusting that God gave them to me already, and I know this, and I just need to
That's right.
accept that. But
That's right.
but the job you are doing here is pretty remarkable. David, thank you for doing it, and thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
God
Bob.
bless you.
All right, back at you.
All right, that's going to do it for Strictly Speaking. This is a special one. Share it. It's going to be on YouTube. It's going to be on True Blue. Watch TrueBlue.com. It's going to be everywhere we can put it, and the more places you can share it, the more people who can see it, and let them decide for themselves what they see and what they believe. And thank you for watching True Blue and Strictly Speaking. See you next time.